Welcome, everyone, to another adventure into reality. I am joined today by Dr. Paul Hynek, the godfather of UFOs and the grandfather of crypto. I'm also joined by Michele Miners once again, and we'll be joined once again by David Ellis in just a minute. Paul, welcome to the show. Michele, welcome to the show.
Howdy.
Howdy. Michele, how you doing today?
Good. How are you doing, Andrew? Nice to be on the show again.
Yeah, I'm doing wonderful. And because Adventures into Reality is an adventure into reality, I want everyone to put their tray tables up and their seats in the upright position, grab a cup of coffee, because we're going to go down a handful of rabbit holes and give you a bunch of nuggets. Before the show started, Paul and I and Michele were talking, and right now we want to talk about Bitcoin, esoterics, and UFOs. So, Paul, you've been big in doing some research on Bitcoin and been discovering unique relations to it. What are some of those things that you'd like to bring up about Bitcoin, maybe as an historical reference as it's evolved to what we have today?
Yeah, what a great place to start. Bitcoin and UFOs together at last, right? So some of the parallels I see are that although a lot of people feel they know from personal experience, perhaps, where UFOs or aliens may come from, there's no widespread consensus. And we also don't know where Bitcoin comes from. We know some of the intellectual predecessors, but the inventor of Bitcoin is unknown. And I would say Bitcoin is perhaps the most innovative technology of our lifetimes, and we don't know who created it. So where it comes from, just like aliens, is shrouded in mystery. I find that fascinating. Another aspect of it is that if you look at the US government's role in both, they are largely an impediment, a negative centralized entity. And with both UFOs and Bitcoin, we think they probably have something. We don't know what, and we don't know what they're going to say. With UFOs, it's all about disclosure with the capital D. And with Bitcoin, it's about regulation. I think the US government looks at the potential of aliens and the potential of Bitcoin both as existential threats to their power. Both with the corrupt fiat currency, which I know you're a big fan of, Andrew, and their overall power base.
One thing to say is China has cracked down on Bitcoin miners hardcore. And it's fair to say that Bitcoin mining machines and the people behind them generate a consciousness that is opposite of fiat dollars. But it's still pure, let's just say, money-driven concept that isn't using the standard petrodollar as its process, which changes the perception of how people view crypto. Because crypto, in its own words, means it's encoded, means it can change. It's not always going to be used the same basket of materials. And then how you extract it from the system, that's considered magic.
Yeah,
or a science, or a sufficiently developed science in which magic and science can't be told apart,
Right. What's magic is that the US dollar has, for a lot of people, this image of being solid and backed by the full faith and confidence of the United States government. But it's not backed. It's abused. It is a molested currency because there is nothing backing it. There's something propping it up. But yes, the dollar is accepted, but as a whole, but each unit is not backed. we've had maybe upwards of 40% of all dollars ever printed happen in the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. That is an amazingly large inflationary pressure on the dollar, whereas Bitcoin has a mathematically guaranteed contract. Gold has always been a good money because it's what they call a hard currency. Throughout history, it's remarkably consistent that each year the output from gold miners is about 1% in addition to the current supply, because it's hard to do, and now there's a lot of gold. So gold has always been a pretty good way to store value because you can't increase the supply that much. And Bitcoin's even better because it's mathematically guaranteed contract, never to exceed 21 million coins. So it's a far better way to store your value than the dollar, which has inflation from price increases, plus also just wanton expansion of the monetary supply.
So one thing about crypto, it starts with a set of technology called the blockchain. Now, blockchain is one of those systems that was developed that allows the data to be decentralized so it can't be hacked. We have seen a few hacks go on so far, but most of those aren't a direct hack of the blockchain, unless I think it was COINTELPRO, a Japanese company that had 800 million taken from them. Yeah. So let's talk about the blockchain and when it was developed as a mathematical concept. Only the top level mathematics in the world people could even understand it.
Yeah, and there have been, crypto overall is kind of the Wild West, especially in 2017. There were lots of what they call rug pulls. Solana was hacked. Axie Infinity was hacked recently. But it's, a blockchain is basically just a distributed ledger, right? It's a shared database. It's a decentralized way to store information so that you don't need one central actor like a bank or a government to store that information, which means that you can't change that information. So with Bitcoin, for example, when you do a transaction, people say, well, Visa processes 30,000 transactions a second, and Bitcoin can only do a few hundred. Okay. Now with Lightning Network, you can do a lot more than that on the Bitcoin blockchain, but also you achieve what they call final settlement within minutes, whereas with Visa and the banks, it takes months sometimes, or weeks and months. So the blockchain itself is the sort of foundation upon which all cryptocurrencies reside. And it's simply a distributed database that makes it impervious to change. It's an immutable record.
Is it fair to say, using a scientific term, that the money inside the blockchain is its own pocket reality or pocket dimension within our reality?
That's kind of cool. And one of the, I've been thinking about, Bitcoin and blockchains. Obviously we've started talking a little bit about the connection with aliens, but also think about what will happen with a Bitcoin, which I think will become the global reserve currency if we have an AI singularity where artificial intelligence becomes self-aware and recursively self-improving. Well, Bitcoin is a decentralized financial network on computers. Our artificial intelligence overlords will be pretty comfortable with that. So Bitcoin will survive a nuclear holocaust. It will survive the computers taking over. It will survive aliens. It will survive anything. It is the cockroach of finance.
So is it a pocket dimension, self-supported? That's a scientific concept that maybe we look at. And if so, do the things in the other dimensions have access to that pocket dimension and can add and remove stuff to the blockchain?
I got to mull that over. That's pretty cool. The other thing about that, and maybe this is what you're sort of getting at, is what about some type of emergent sentience in a blockchain?
Yes.
Right? Something I've thought a lot about is, we talk about people are afraid of artificial intelligence and if it becomes self-aware. Well, first of all, I'm less afraid of artificial intelligence than I am about human stupidity. Will we even survive until computers take over? That's my question. And so people talk a lot about, well, how will software become sentient and have consciousness. I think it's going to happen the other way around. We humans have consciousness, computers have machine capabilities. It's harder for me to see how a computer network, either through its own internal emergent properties, achieves consciousness, or that we somehow grafted onto it as it is to have increasing brain-computer interface such that we can adopt machine capabilities because we already have consciousness. And in that way, I think we will have a singularity, and I think we will drag Bitcoin along for the ride. And I think actually Bitcoin will be one of the strongest enabling factors for our continued process or our continued progress.
So another little thing to add here, we as human beings create our own reality through the consciousness and the interaction with the general narrative that works here. Bitcoin came out, was not something that was part of the general narrative, was allowed in. Is it fair to say that fiat dollars retains some form of energy from our belief system and belief engine? Could that possibly generate a self-spawning AI within the Bitcoin because our belief energy is transferring from fiat to this pocket dimension? Or could it attract life that is not necessarily artificial, but non-physical, such as UFOs, which we're hinting at before, that this signals a greater awareness?
Well, I hope fiat doesn't send signals or attract anybody because it's sending the wrong message of corruption and despoilage. So I hope it doesn't send out any kind of beacon or prove the substrate for any kind of consciousness.
Well, I wasn't saying that. There's a consciousness within each belief of each dollar and each transaction, which is translated over to Bitcoin, because we're still using Bitcoin as an exchange for value system in which our belief has been put into it by an engine that says fiat and the system that says this is my exchange for value. Mm-hmm. It is almost a nursery for consciousness.
I like that. Yeah.
Okay. So we're pushing the boundaries here. So let's talk a little bit about when we take money out of Bitcoin, what is it doing to the blockchain that still has a limited amount? There's always a shrinkage and a growth there.
Well, the blockchain isn't so much a bank as it is just a database. And so every 10 minutes, there's a new block put onto the chain. And so it records money that people buy Bitcoin, people sell it. The amount of Bitcoin out there is growing, but it's never decreasing, because Bitcoins, to the blockchain's understanding, the amount of Bitcoins is only increasing by the amount that are mined. Now, the amount that are in active circulation, that can decrease because people can lose their passwords, etc. And one of the other interesting aspects of the creation of Bitcoin is that whoever created it, he, she, or they, or it, they have about 1 million Bitcoin in their wallet, and they have never touched them, not once. So the entity or group that is responsible for the biggest financial innovation of all time has never profited from it.
So earlier, before the show started, I brought up the concept that there might be an off-world bank, and that crypto might be the initial link to that. And that 1 million supported crypto, along with the AI we've talked about, might be the system that allows the cooked books on both sides.
Yeah. I think there's been a lot of good thought put into this about Bitcoin astronomy, which is a term from Drew Basal of Unchained Capital. And, he and others, and I've been thinking about this, talk about how I think, just to put my cards out there, I think Bitcoin will become the global reserve currency, will become the main representative of value on Earth, such that if we are to communicate by trade or other means with another civilization in the future, it will be through our Bitcoin, which they may call Earth coin. And I think it, by extension, each planet will have its own vaguely similar, I believe, proof of work protocol digital currency, because I think it's kind of like Richard Dawkins talks about with convergent evolution in a biological sense. Oh, cool. I think we'll have a convergent financial evolution so that each planet will have its own coin. You really can't expect an alien civilization to come down to Earth and accept dollars and monitor the Fed for the nuances that they emit in terms of how interest rates will fluctuate. But they'll look at like our overall Earth coin, which represents the planet itself. And I think we'll have, what's tantamount to a planetary credit score, which will represent how well we're viewed in the universe. And that will dictate the acceptability of the Earth or Bitcoin.
And as well as Earthlings taking their Bitcoin, their Earth wallet somewhere else and getting exchange for value at we'll just call it the celestial exchange system.
That's right. Right. A star base, right?
Yeah. That's still decentralized within your own planet, but consciousness is still a part of it. A big thing in ufology is bilocation, multi-location, multi-realities, multi-dimensionality, or no bodies, all energy. And that would mean something like an energetic crypto system would be existing for all the other life forms who are not 2 arms and legs, but energy. Or use a temporary body, because that's really common throughout much of the ufology history, is they have bodies that they can enter and leave on will, almost like skin suits.
Right. And I see a question from Santo about why is it assumed that blockchain will be used as the universal currency of exchange? I think it's a good question. I think that Bitcoin for Earth will be that because it's got unique aspects of decentralized. It's not represented by one government or another. Nobody has ever had an ability to get free Bitcoin. It's the most fair, egalitarian currency of all. It's the hardest currency of all. Nobody can fake it. So to me, it's got unique advantages that I think would make it most suitable for an Earth representation of currency.
Very well put. Very well put. Robert, has David made it in yet?
He's here.
David, are you there?
Yeah, I am, Andrew. Just trying to figure out the camera situation, but go ahead.
So we've been talking about AI, Bitcoin currency. Have you been able to listen in here?
Yeah, I just came in and I heard the exchange. Correct.
So from an artificial intelligence perspective, what does AI and Bitcoin need right now? I know you're studying. Begin your studies with AI programming, and you have a data science background.
If we are going to interact on the level that your guest is talking about, we are way behind in that. Okay, you made a very good point when you said when you're dealing with alien technology, they're not going to be monitoring Federal Reserve and changes and such like, and Bitcoin is the ideal interface for that. But in terms of sort of computerizing and globalizing it, we are way behind, right? Like a lot of people hear the word and they don't even know what that is. Education has to be paramount in this drive, for sure. So in terms of the digitalizing of something like this, it is not actually very hard. What would be very hard is the interface to an alien civilization. That is the hard part, right? Because we tend to think in terms of, we used to think in terms of zeros and ones. Now we're thinking in terms of fuzzy logic. But I suppose it's a difference between the decimal system and, I suppose, quantum mechanics. That's the difference, right? How do you get them to interface? You literally have to down-regulate. It's kind of like the difference between putting copper in your house, but your house has putting fiber optics in your house, but your house has copper inside. So you're going to have to find some sort of interface between the two, if you get my analogy in this sense. I think
something that allows consciousness to interact with technology, and the technology not manipulating the consciousness.
Now, ironically, we do have something like this, but it is being utilized in the wrongest way by systems of governments and so on, right? Where we try to digitalize the thought process. I believe Musk Is that Elon Musk? Yeah.
Yep.
One of his pet projects, because he has a problem believing in like God as an example, right? And it's very interesting to me. It's very useful because then he is going to make an attempt to try to make that communication. He has no choice, right? There's one thing about a billionaire you could always count on is that they will try to fill in their inadequacies. So I believe that he's moving into that kind of spectrum. Now you have Amazon Web Services, right? Now that company has over like 174 different services, and they occupy about 40% of the market in terms of AI services, in terms of technology services and platform-based services. So right now they are the most suited in the market to do that, but then you have to get around the whole commercial basic control issue, right? With the Bezos situation. Honestly, whoever created Bitcoin as an example, I'm quite sure that if they created something like that, they absolutely can create an interface between our system of processing, so to speak, to a more higher level consciousness processing that incorporates consciousness.
Right.
That would be my
So, Paul, with that being said, as a bit of a context, in ufology, we commonly see reports from craft that have no moving parts, that are completely controlled by the consciousness. And it's probably fair to say that something within the interface and the user interface, the non-physical user interface, would be the next level in which Bitcoin can be used as the celestial exchange system.
Correct.
Celestial exchanges. I like that. And David, nice to meet you. I enjoyed very much hearing your comments just now.
Yeah. Hello, Paul. How are you? Nice to meet you.
Likewise. There you go.
There we go.
So celestial exchange systems, user interfaces, UFOs. So let's use some of the UFO background wisdom knowledge that's out there as we get back to Bitcoin, so people have a little bit of understanding about some of the UFO lore about non-moving machinery.
Yeah, so I guess that's a lot to chew on there, right? They're both kind of rules. We think of one of the ways I think about, and my father used to think about potential alien visitations. One of the issues of extraterrestrial visitation is it's so improbable. How do they find us? Why do they care? How do they get so far? Well, one possibility is that they are sort of AI sentient beings, say fancy drones, right? Perhaps with some type of synthetic, entity inside, but they're all rules-based. And so they're not perhaps guided by some centralized force telling it what to do. It's got sort of a Stephen Wolfram localized cellular automata type control system. And that's what decentralized networks like Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies are. They're all rules-based, and they don't have a centralized person of any kind telling it what to do. I saw Santo's other comment about the whales manipulating the Bitcoin price, and that's true. And that will get less over time as the distribution of Bitcoins gets larger. But the decentralization and the rules-based aspect is something I think applies to both potential alien visitations and decentralized currency networks.
Wouldn't it be funny if they found them aliens' Bitcoin wallet and that's what they reverse engineered?
People talk about in UFOs how there's a lot of UFOs reported around nuclear installations.
Right.
And that may be true. It can also be true that we have more observational capacity at nuclear bases. And so there's sort of an observation bias. But there's a fairly common belief that nuclear signals that we send out, the first signals that other civilizations may have received of us are like the broadcasts of I Love Lucy, which have been going out these many decades. Now we're sending out sort of darker nuclear signals that may be a beacon for them to come in and say, hey, look, you guys are a threat to yourselves and to the galaxy, knock it off, right? But something like a Bitcoin could be a positive beacon that it represents a watershed evolution in our culture that may then grant us access to the interstellar vault.
As well as give us different views on how Bitcoin, like, could it be a pocket dimension, a pocket reality, or is it just a specific layer of consciousness in which common things use to exchange energy?
It's very interesting that I don't know if you guys were monitoring the news as of recently. The Canadian government is trying to legislate to incorporate Bitcoin under its broad banner of controls, right? I mean, they could try it, but I don't think that it's going to be particularly effective if anybody knows how digital currency works, all right? So that's not a good look for them. It's not a good look because they're trying to set a precedent that they hope other governments will follow. And I don't know how they're going to do that, honestly, because the way Bitcoin operates is going to be very, very difficult for them to do that. And why would you want to? Why would you want to do that? That's the other question.
Because it's a power they already have and they don't want to give it up.
That's right.
Yeah, it's the fiat, they've got a faucet and they can turn it on and off anytime, just print money to their heart's content. And it's this Keynesian madness where you feel that you have to expand the economy. And, as Keynes said, the future can solve its own problems. Well, now with the inflation that we're seeing, we are the future solving the problems that were created before us. Canada, the Bank of Canada just put out a research study that says that people that own Bitcoin in Canada have less financial literacy. But what they also noticed is that people that own Bitcoin tend to have higher incomes, which to me is often a proxy for some amount of financial literacy. So I don't know how sound that study was.
I think a lot of... Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, that's going to take a little processing. That's a lot of language to chew on.
No, I understood what he said. Now, you have to take into consideration that there are issues of control. Now, what has happened in Canada is that they have figured out, since the issues with the truckers, that the threat of financial restriction is a means of control. Okay. I think I've said before that they're ushering in a new moral precedent. When you talk about consciousness, you have to take this into consideration, because our judicial system, our political system operates on the basis of the golden rule. It used to for many, many years, okay, which is a basic form of moral structure. The new moral structure has to do with, as long as it's in the public's best interest, all cards are on the table. And so when you're talking about the barriers, putting barriers to information as an example, if the information in question is against the greater good of society, then you can legislate against it. This is the new precedent that is being set all over the world. And I monitor legal affairs all over the world on a daily basis. So there is that. But Paul, to answer the comments that you have made, the documented question that you're referring to is trying to establish that concept. It's trying to establish that, but you need data for that, right? And once again, how do you get data for that? How do you get data for something that you have to get cooperation from every government on earth to get that kind of data, to implement any kind of policies and whatever else? I think, honestly, in terms of human evolution, Bitcoin is a natural evolution of our understanding of finance. It is a natural evolution of our understanding. And so anything that seeks to control / restrict it is by nature retarding evolution as a species. Okay. And that's very sad.
I think you're right. In the earlier days, money was not the province of governments. Governments saw that, hey, this is the fatted calf. We need to grab onto this. So a lot of people have a hard time understanding a money separated from a government, whether it's backed or not. That idea itself is a little bit shocking. But the bottom line is that governments have abused that privilege with fiat currencies, and all fiat currencies die. And we're watching kind of an alarming potential accelerating death spiral of the US dollar in front of our eyes. People look at Bitcoin and think about how volatile it is, and the price goes way up and down. Well, in the 12 years that it's been around, it's had a 1.6 million% return on investment. That's not bad. And at the same time, gold has had about 26% return.
Ouch.
So it's just not a very good store of value. The US government, they should be afraid and antagonistic from their provincial point of view towards Bitcoin, just like they should be afraid to disclose information about aliens. If I was in the Air Force, I don't think I would disclose any information about aliens. My job is not to help the world. My job is to preserve power for the Air Force. And giving people their deepest, darkest secrets is not going to help. That doesn't benefit humanity, but that's how the Air Force thinks.
I just want to drop in quantum computing. Is it already existing in cryptocurrency in your view?
Well, I'm working with my friend David Chaum on the first quantum resistant messaging app running on a blockchain. And quantum computing is an existential threat for all computer systems, not just crypto, but your Bank of America account. And in the crypto ecosystem, you've got, I think, more advanced work on quantum decryption and post-quantum encryption to prevent quantum decryption of, crypto blockchains. So it's kind of a cat and mouse game to see how fast a commercial or government application of quantum decryption is viable, and how fast the crypto community and banking community and espionage community can come up with their own defenses against quantum decryption.
Mm-hmm.
I am getting inventor of the neurophone kind of feeling. Paul, how have you made it this far in those studies? The inventor of the neurophone, what you are describing there is something that is a threat to a whole bunch of stuff, not just the systems of domination control. That is the end. If you give people an option, then that is the end. And quantum computing is a whole, because you're taking into consideration intent. Now, remember that the whole money system was always based on the concept of intent, okay? Like I pay you, as an example, something you value for something, intent, right? You were talking about consciousness and how we move from just the concept of this is the paper, give me this, to a concept of intent, which is what the original system of exchange was based on, right, Andrew? And so you have you have Bitcoin, which is a kind of digitalization of an old concept, right? That's what it is. It's a digitalization of a very old concept, the original concept. So yeah, that's a threat. Paul, you okay? You're fine. I mean, like you say your prayers and stuff, because that is a very touchy subject for a lot of people. If I was in the position of power, that would be a threat to me. You see?
Yeah. And there was a comment in the chat by, I think, Robbie here. What if the country you live in outlaws crypto? Well, a lot of countries have made bans of one kind or another. The US government bans Americans from participating in the early stages of crypto projects, which is particularly heinous. But it's kind of like prohibition. That didn't really work. Mm-hmm. And the cat is out of the bag, especially for Bitcoin, because it's been adjudicated as a property by the IRS. So the US government, even if they wanted to, they can't stamp it out. And again, like UFOs, we need to look at the government as not one monolithic block, one central actor working in coherence and cohesion. There are turf wars in different agencies and departments in the US government that have wildly different attitudes towards Bitcoin and UFOs. And we see that quite a lot. So the government doesn't have and especially in the Congress, in the Senate and the House of Representatives, there's a lot of support for Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. Why? Because cryptocurrency companies are putting money into their campaign coffers. That's how the system works. There's not a lot of money in the anti-crypto world to put to, fund campaign contributions. But in the executive side, it's a little bit different. But again, it's not one overall cohesive force. There are just so many different attitudes and valences toward it that it's hard for the government to, even if they were to operate as one coordinated force, they still couldn't stop it, but they just don't have the unity to even make a good stab at it. They can do some regulations and they can demand more KYC and information and things like that. I think that will help. I think largely the regulations that the US government can muster up will be helpful because they will make more sort of comforting guardrails for an increased flow of institutional investing.
Paul, I have a question for you. Interesting, you talk about consciousness banking systems. And when does it come where we start to now manipulate the consciousness out there in a universal way? Because they've been trying to do it with the ufology narrative for quite a long time. And I think that cryptocurrency could be a danger with that as well. The few controlling the many of what information that needs to go out. And I think that's what you're leading to with this legislative piece that you're talking about in the moment.
Yeah. And I think, the decentralized nature, well, let's look at this. So right now in the world, there are about 2 billion unbanked people that have no bank account and are completely shut out from the world financial system. Another couple billion are preyed upon by usurious credit card companies. So, I mean, the financial system as it exists is corrupt and benefits the 1% and is not an even playing field at all. The whole Bitcoin was created in response to the 2008 financial crisis to say, okay, enough. You're printing money willy-nilly. People don't have equal access to the system. That's not right. So it's decentralized. So it's, to your point, Michele, it's trying to get away from this power of the few to put their thumb on the scale and do what they want. And it seems to me it's like if we have direct communications with other civilizations, it's more decentralized. It allows us to contact each other peer to peer without that meddling intermediary.
And is time no longer a factor if quantum computing is a process for that?
Woof. Wow. I'm just a French major, so I got to mull that over. But, it's also like, if you think about quantum computing is like anti-gravity or desktop molecular level 3D printing or the technological AI singularity. Or if we reverse engineer the propulsion system of a flying saucer, if you do those are qualitative developments that are all singularities in their own way, that represent an event horizon beyond which we cannot predict the future. Those are all black swans of the highest order.
But quantum computing has the potential for, if time is no longer relevant for that. So if you're going from planet A to planet B, they don't share a common linear time. When we look at the light sky and we're looking at the stars in the sky, the light we're seeing is millions of years old. So quantum banking and quantum computing should, in effect, be a timeless process. Or again, I go back to its own pocket dimension, pocket reality.
Yeah, that kind of interplanetary communication right now is, as my father used to say, the not yet born talking to the long since dead.
Yes, and I believe that's a very prominent process within our evolution of humanity.
Yes, and how do you measure value in a system like that? That will be the next question that I'm going to throw.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's kind of like a post
value in a system like that.
In some aspects, it's a post-scarcity. It's like a post-scarcity economy. How do you what is value? If you can make anything that you want with a desktop printer, what do you need? And I think that something like a Bitcoin still maintains value. It's a common unit of exchange. But the idea that you can make anything that you want, or that you could decode or break into anything that you want, any other system, or that you have AI that turns all of your, adversarial countries' computing systems and, war planes and battleships into yours. Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, I think this is a dangerous road you're going down there, Paul. I have to say, I think that's a dangerous road you're going.
I'm not driving. I'm kind of like dragging on the fender on the back, trying to catch my breath.
So
Right?
as an example, let's talk about the concept of value. What we're doing here right now, we're giving information to people who are inside this chat. That's value, right? 10 years from now, they can look back at it, but the value would be different, but the same. It would be different, but the same, right? So let's say right now you have you have a stock of gold, you have a gold bar in your house, right? Who's to say 3 generations down the road, that would be your paperweight. Kind of the same value, but right?
Right.
It's kind of the same value, but a paperweight, right? So go ahead, Michele.
I was going to say, David, so is consciousness going to become a value system? The way we think, the way we interact, the way we purchase soul, I guess, credits. I don't know how to even describe that, but what we're getting to is something
Maybe your celestial exchange wallet goes lifetime to lifetime, and you can accrue credits from lifetime to lifetime because the off-world beings live 50, 60, 70,000 years.
Yeah, but then you get caught up in the tangible and non-tangible. Like Andrew, yourself, myself, and Amir have been recording for the past two days or so. You, myself, and Michele had a discussion earlier today. Okay, just watch this concept. And right now we're having a discussion with Paul. Paul has given us a wealth of information. Okay? Tangible and non-tangible consciousness has to factor in the concept of intent, of what we sort of etherically put in. Because if we're dealing with alien consciousness and you come down, you can't establish a value system because what they have might be valuable to us. But what we have might be valuable to them in another way. Could you imagine, and Amir and I did this on the show, that you have an alien civilization with the nth results of all sorts of technologies, right? But they don't know how to bake a brownie.
Or don't know how to be pregnant.
Well, I have a link between brownies and aliens. The trailer for the original Alien movie shows this foreboding rocky landscape of that planet. That planet was a pan of brownies, David, that was filmed in my brother's kitchen.
Oh, really?
That's funny.
Now you imagine aliens visiting your house just to get at those brownies.
That's right. They were that good.
You see thus, a little bit different, right?
Thus why I said earlier, your mom's chicken soup is a memory. And the potential that memories have high value to them, experiences have high value through them. And it's the experience of creating something that can be passed on to another being who goes through your creation process as if it were a memory to them. And that's what your celestial Bitcoin wallet might store lifetime to lifetime for you.
Right. There you go. That's brownies. And that was an egg. That was a regular egg as well.
Is that correct? Wow.
Yeah. So memories of consciousness are commodified. And I have a lot of my own connections to communications that have indicated the celestial exchange system is memory-based as well as product-based. An example, if you want to build a ship over here, you can trade energy from point A to point B, but the energy is valued by the two people that are exchanging the system, and the celestial source validates the exchange. So the consciousness of the planet is a part of each transactionary process. So the energy it takes to, let's say, fill up a machine that's designed to build a spaceship that's gigantic, instead of centuries for us, it builds it in hours. and the exchange where hundreds of people or thousands of people can be generating an energy for commodity exchange to other places who build physical objects or trade memories to build physical objects.
Honestly, Andrew, the biggest value that we have as human beings on Earth is our multidimensionality.
And our experience as it. Yeah.
Right?
And the ongoing experience. Yeah, the ongoing experience of multidimensionality.
I think people think that aliens would come here to mine resources and stuff like that. Are they aware, like people who say these things, mine our resources, they want our water, they want our gold, like, come on. Like Pluto is just around the corner. Come on, right? Melt that snow and then, the ice, and you have like, aliens are not going to be mining, right, our resources. We only have a periodic table with a certain amount of elements in it, right? We don't know what dark matter is.
Nope.
We call it dark matter, but we don't actually know what the hell that thing is. So we are very limited. So you have to ask yourself, what would be interesting about this planet?
Its signature frequency. Water is extremely valuable no matter where you go. And water here from Earth is full of high consciousness energy, the solar radiation and the life force that lives in it. And it is regularly used as starter waters for planets that are built from the ground up by high technology societies.
That makes more sense. But then at the end of it, at the root of it all, it comes with the whole concept of multidimensionality, our ability to adapt in certain situations.
Right. The great food chain of life is locked within that water. And if you're going to start an ocean that's going to grow and grow and grow as you add more and more water and more consciousness from multiple planets, you develop a surface system that's separate of a celestial conscious. It's just a hollow thing, but it has all the ingredients to make it feel like a living world.
I have a question for Paul. Paul, you know I'm going to ask you about Mars, right? I mean, you knew that was coming.
Bring it.
Now, there's a lot of evidence that something or a civilization existed on Mars. Okay? Now, we have certain requirements which they're not public, but there's certain requirements which we determine as a planet is inhabitable or has been inhabited and so on. The existence of water or bacteria being one of them. So I guess I have to ask, has bacteria been actually found on Mars?
Yes.
Because this is very important stuff.
I don't know that bacteria has been found on Mars, but what they have found is compelling evidence of water having been there. Right? And if water is there, it's hard to imagine some form of bacteria not being present.
Weren't some of the Mars rocks found in the North Pole found with solidified pieces of bacteria and protozoa in them? I believe so. And I believe the Chinese craft that just went by Mars found liquid water. I mean, that was just about a year ago. So there's both identified liquid water on the moon and liquid water on the Mars.
There's something to be said. That's a very interesting planet, right? We all, this is the goal. This is the goal for a lot of people, to actually go look at Mars up front and personal. Human being to human being. There is something in the consciousness that says that we need to go see that planet, right? A lot of people are making efforts. NASA's making a lot of efforts to try to get a probe and people to Mars. And I'm like, and for sure, it's in the television and the media as well. So my question is, do we have some sort of association with that planet that we don't know about? Because time not being linear as we know it, right? Because time is an illusion. Let's get rid of that concept, right? We have to understand that inside, why Mars? Why Mars? We understand that Venus is toxic. We know that. Why particularly Mars, right? Why Mars Attacks? You remember that movie? I love that movie.
Yeah.
the country and western, making their heads explode. Does everybody remember that movie?
I love that movie.
Watches
1990s.
Yeah.
So Paul, the question they're asking is probably, why are we terraforming that planet, particularly when we have moons around us, exoplanets? I mean, we could get really broad in this spectrum. Yeah, why Mars? Is it an old civilization that anciently was formed? I mean, and we're going back to what we knew, consciously trying to get things terraformed back to its natural state, the way we used to know it. Something to think about.
Yeah. Or, also Mars is a fairly good candidate from a logistical point of view in that it's, relatively speaking, not that far. It's large, and it does present the capacity for terraforming, as you mentioned, to create an atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of scary thing is that, we're not doing a very good shepherding our own planet. Gaia is in jeopardy. And so there's a fair amount of hubris to think that we can create a better environment from essentially nothing on Mars when we're almost creating a nothing environment from something on Earth. But I think it's our manifest destiny to go out into space, whether it's on the moon or Mars or other planets. And I've had conversations with the University of California, Santa Barbara Physics Department, because they are the world leaders in photonic propulsion, essentially using lasers to accelerate rockets to 20, 30% the speed of light. And we've had conversations with a German space ethicist, which is a great title for a job, about, okay, if we can send these rockets, should we put tardigrades and C. elegans worms on there to engage essentially in panspermia, where you send life out? Do we have the right? Do we have the duty? Should we not do that? It's a very meaty question to talk about propagating life elsewhere. A friend of mine, Nova Spivak, crash landed tardigrades on the moon. So he has sent life entities to another celestial body. I think it's inevitable at this point, for good or bad, that we will colonize Mars. And I hope we either, to your point, Michele, respect our ancient kinship, or just have a little bit more respect for the overall planet and the environment there than we seem to have for our own here.
As long as Big Pharma's not creating the tardigrades, a Pfizer tardigrade, I'm good with that.
and tardigrade, that's my totem animal. They can live in a volcano, they can live at the bottom of the ocean, on top of Mount Everest, they can live in space for 10 years. And we may be descended from tardigrades. The water bears are the coolest animals of all time.
Beautifully put. So back to Mars. So ufology has stuck to Mars as the main story, but Mars has Sirius, it has Cerberus. What are some of the UFOs lore that you know about Cerberus and some of the Mars moons?
I don't know any.
Well, supposedly there's a bunch of bases up there, and it was, I believe, the Russian ship that got shot down right as it was nearing Cerberus. Again, information that's not readily repeated in ufology about some of the stuff that happened during the initial explorations of Mars by the Viking projects.
Well, if you name something Cerberus, you're going to want to be careful getting close to it, right?
Right, a three-headed dog from hell.
That's funny. I suppose I have a question. My question is the discoveries on the moon. I recently visited a ranch where I saw pictures of this. It's a friend of mine, and he collects UFO artifacts and stuff like that. And I saw a picture of the lady in the craft. Could you just expand a little bit more on that in the 3 mile section in the moon? Because I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, I'm coming up blank on that too. I don't know anything about that.
I'm going to try to share. No, I can't share. But anyway, there are pictures on the internet, and there are pictures of beings that were captured, or so to speak, found dead in crafts and so on. Are these things actually just old wives' tales, or are these things actually things that have been discovered? Because these are the things that we usually ask each other, and we want to know. Well, I suppose I want to know: are these things legit?
No idea.
David, let me go back to some Native American lore. Okay, so I come from 3 tribes: Navajo, Pawnee, and Chippewa. In my Pawnee tribe, I am considered from the clan of the Skidee, which means wolf.
Mm-hmm.
But the Skidee natives were the only tribe within the Pawnee whole that were allowed to hold the star charts. And we went to, and we looked upon Pleiades as being our guided solar system.
Yes.
So if we look back anciently to what you're saying, if anciently my ancestors looked at that solar system and they had that interaction and being the star keepers, which are now recorded on buffalo skins that have been found, those are considered ancient celestial artifacts. And so I'm sure your friend who holds on to these relics probably has gotten a treasure trove of knowledge of something that's out there that we can't explain right now because we haven't had that same interaction as we once did anciently.
You see, what I have been observing is the religious stories from different religions and how they present their encounters with what they call celestial beings. Okay? Now, when we conceptualize the concept of a prime creator, we generally tend to think of the prime creator in terms of benevolent terms, right? So we say God is love, or Allah is merciful, and so on. But the actual stories don't actually pan that out. Andrew and I just did a show recently on that subject. So if you went through every biblical story, and if you went through every story in the Gita, and if you went through the story in the Gita and the Mahabharata, and if you went through most Abrahamic religions, there are references to beings that are not God, but they're interacting with humanity. And obviously, Andrew's Greek, the Olympian religion. Now, if every religion on earth is saying the same things, the encounters and so on, and certainly the American Indians. I live in a place where, my friend there collects what you just said. And so I live in a place where the American Indians are literally screaming at the top of their lungs in their drawings and so on over the past few centuries that, there's something out here. Okay? So how does this go unnoticed in general terms? Because, come on, every religion on earth says, there were gods and there were demigods, and the morality structure does not equate to what we understand as the prime creator. There's something else intermediary in there. To get back to Paul's point on the concept of finance and so on, and the exchange of finance and so on, I think from every story that we can determine what was most important, if you want to just walk with me here, right? All these stories from our ancestors that we now think of as religion could be alien contact as well, right? Okay, so in all of the stories, what was most important was not the gold, it was not the resources, it wasn't any of that stuff. It was our ability to be multidimensional beings. In some cases, how we determine free will, our genetic structure, as an example, right? You don't breed a whole race of demigods, as an example, because you are idle. Well, probably I would do that because, David is idle. But you don't breed a whole race of demigods because you're just idle. You breed them because there's something about that particular species genetic code that is adaptable. Do you guys see where I'm coming from?
Yeah.
The value on Earth it has less to do with our resources and more to do with what Andrew was alluding to earlier on. You put a human being, any piece of a human being in water, and something different happens to that water. Okay? No matter at the microscopic level or whatever else, or our origin. So I think that is something that should be considered, because when we did that Angels and Aliens show, we were just talking about it and so on. So I did the deep dive because David is idle. We've already established that. I did the deep dive into the different stories from different religions. All of these stories have as their motif gods trying to influence gods, and I put this in inverted commas, trying to influence the process of human evolution through changing things, but not changing where you live or whatever, or the resources where you have, but changing aspects of the human being. Does that make any sense to everyone here?
It is the nature of the experience, which then opens up new potentials of observation from the consciousness. And when consciousness is observing something, it is altering it until one reaches the higher multidimensional state where they can both be the entangled and unentangled observer simultaneously, which gets back to quantum computing. Now, Paul, you had said earlier, no one truly knows where Bitcoin has come from. And I want to just give a bit of just a little supposition, maybe a potential story that maybe the first AIs that were created had their capacity to go look at the human system and the potentials of the future and created it as the backdoor system at a time where technology was rapidly changing. You're muted, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. You're muted as the universal Zoom greeting. Yeah, it's not the first time that I've heard the idea of Bitcoin being some type of meme or seed deposited here to help us propel, because it's such a force for peace and unity. I think that's tantalizing. It is amazingly impactful, and yet does build upon a lot of the things that were already there. So it's more iterative of a lot of different fields put together. And so it's not a monumental advance in any one area, but the way it was combined and the timing and the way it was done without attribution is what adds that special sauce to it.
The mystery, the special sauce, all of that. So as commercial AI gets to be far more available to the everyday person, is it fair to say that eventually cryptocurrency will have its own AI, let's say, protective systems, so that quantum decomputing can't hit the blockchain or the system itself, which creates an entire avenue of quantum programming of creating defensive systems that might not use time as a relative number?
Yeah, crypto overall is already more resistant. That's the term we use now. It's more quantum resistant than the traditional financial banking systems. So it's already in better shape, and it's going to improve faster and be more resilient to quantum threats in the future.
And what could be some of those examples of quantum threats?
Well, right now, passwords you can use brute force attacks, and it takes a lot of cycles to get through, especially a good password of 12 or more characters with different types of characters and not sequences, and not the word password backwards, things like that. It takes a long time to get through a password like that. With quantum decryption, it would take seconds, because the whole way you evaluate compute cycles is qualitatively different. So you've got to come up with techniques, and there are already various off-the-shelf techniques that you can put together. I had to register for export encryption this one particular blockchain and messaging application I've been helping my friend David Chom with, had to register it with the Department of Commerce. And I was informed that they routinely forward these applications to the NSA. Well, on our website, we tout that we effectively thwart the efforts of 3-letter government agencies. So I was really curious how that would land, but it turned out they were okay with it because they're actually more concerned about financial institutions as opposed to individual communication layers.
Wow. Very interesting. And then you've got all the Snowden-esque observation, technical systems that they have there. And in a sense, Bitcoin and maybe some of its predecessors to come could be used in a way to isolate communications and create true end-to-end encryption, like you've talked about with your quantum messaging system.
Yeah, and another use of a blockchain that I've thought about is, it's a distributed database that can't be wiped out. So one of the things I've wanted to do, and I've started working on, is, we get all bent out of shape because the government has these silos of information that they don't release. And yet in the civilian world, we've done the same thing with different UFO research groups having different databases that don't talk to each other. So I'm trying to unite these and get all this data together so that we can find better, stronger, more widespread, more global emergent patterns from the data. And so having all these things together, a blockchain is the natural database for UFO reports such that no government can suppress them.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's cool. So as long as the data is there, it can never be taken away, which then can purposely evolve the momentum of disclosure.
Yeah, you can wipe out, if somebody has a database of, the APRO database on a computer, somebody can wipe out that hard drive. But if it's shared by 5 million computers around the world, good luck with that.
So
until they develop mass applications for that.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
So the redundancy is basically everybody.
Yeah, that decentralization has so many benefits for individuals that are tired of being under the yoke of government nefarious influences, whether it's financial or just holding on to information that they shouldn't hold on to.
Now, Paul, you have a financial background, and some of these financial debt vehicles that we see over and over again, debt ceiling, etc., is Bitcoin and the potentiality of Bitcoin something we can use to get some of this debt off the balance sheets, and a potential, as if we weren't in a corrupt government, that massive debt can be taken off the books so a natural evolution can go?
That's a good question. Bitcoin is not a magic wand, but it is the hardest currency and the most honest store of value ever created. Governments around the world all act without any gold backing of their money. They're just printing money as they want. It's what led in large part to the fall of the Roman Empire and many other empires. They just abuse this privilege of printing money because it's a short-term benefit and a long-term pain. Bitcoin doesn't have that. There's a reckoning. You cannot overprint the currency of Bitcoin. So it's an honest way to account for value. And that's kind of a transformation or a wave of cleansing over the current corrupt financial systems. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be painless, and it's not going to be magic, but it's inexorable, and there's not a thing that governments can do about it.
Yes, I was actually about to ask the question of the whole macroeconomics situation. When you incorporate organizations such as the IMF and so on, assume for a moment that every country adopts Bitcoin at the governmental level. What does that do to our macroeconomic situation?
Well, the governments, it's kind of like alcohol and cannabis, right? The US government realized with prohibition that they could not stop alcohol, but they could tax it. And now with cannabis, much more on a state-by-state basis, especially pioneered by Colorado, they're seeing they can grow money on trees, literally. And that if they regulate it properly, Colorado hasn't fallen into, degenerate moral turpitude. It's still a viable state.
Yeah, I live in Canada.
Revenue. And now there's so much more awareness of not only of the intoxicating effects of THC, but of the therapeutic aspects of CBD. So the U.S. government has been through this kind of, angst and catharsis before. And I think eventually, especially propelled by the support in the legislative branch, the government will come to the same conclusion. Hey, we can't stop it. And if we stop it here, other countries will benefit inordinately. So let's try to do what we can. Let's regulate it in some way, but we cannot control it. So let's tax it as best we can.
Yeah, Paul, you said that a Bitcoin is not a magic wand, but it's the closest thing that we have. So I'm thinking in terms of what usually happens, and I can pretty much tell you the corporate playbook. If you can't control it, slow it down until you can hijack it. That is the corporate playbook. Okay.
Yeah, it isn't a magic wand, but it is a more honest system of account. And with that, we can go ahead and create value and store value in an honest way where we know it will be there tomorrow and it won't, be ravaged by hyperinflation. And that in itself is just setting a solid foundation for future innovation.
As well as social justice systems won't devalue certain products that had high value at one time, but social justice devalued it.
Mm-hmm. And government tampering and government abuse and all that. It's, we see the same thing with UFOs. Personally, I don't give a rat's ass anymore about what the United States government deigns to disclose about UFOs. I'm tired of being led around, right? There's enough information out there for people to come to their own conclusion about the reality of the UFO phenomena and start speculating if they don't have any personal experiences about where they may come from or when. Another planet, other planets, or another dimension, our collective unconscious, what have you. I just don't think we need to go to the government anymore for answers about UFOs, nor for responsibility about finance.
Right, because we're already giving away our responsibility for them to tell if it's real or not. Each individual has to come to their own conclusions within that, and there's more than enough information out there for every user to validate their unique expression, whether they have an experience with it or not.
Yeah, I'm hard-pressed to find anybody who thinks that the United States government has been a responsible fiducial shepherd of technological secrets from aliens or of the value of currency.
Well, maybe that's a good way to sue the government for their fiduciary responsibility from the compartmentalization of technology.
Yeah, they're not registered, though.
Yeah.
That's a sad thing about it.
Well, technically, there is
fiduciary responsibility.
Technically, there is a Corporation of America.
Well, yes, there is, but they have defaulted on every fiduciary responsibility. Like God, like if they were a corporation, they'd be, look, wow. The shareholders, you know how many lawsuits that is? Well,
yeah.
Lawsuits. And here's the thing. I think, and I said it on your other show, when you have a system as an example, and I want to pick up Paul's point and strengthen Paul's point. When you have a system as an example where the judiciary is ultimately linked to the political structure, and yes, you may have checks and balances in place. So as an example, and I'm going to show you how this plays out. So you have a Supreme Court, and the president in power appoints Supreme Court nominees. And yes, there is a checks and balances that you can and put in place to stop the appointment of certain individuals. But let's be real here. If you are president, you're going to put in into the Supreme Court somebody who backs a particular agenda, a particular financial agenda as well, or an outlook. And so the money system, our financial system, has become corrupt as a result of it, because at the end of the day, who has the last word is the courts. So if you don't like what's going on in government, you can sue the government, and you could sue them all the way up to the Supreme Court, and you will get stopped right there. So I honestly, like, Bitcoin is kind of like, as I said, it's not a magic, as Paul said, it's not a magic wand, right? But it is a fair system, and fairness is an issue here. And then you have to think in terms of the powers that be. If you were a Rothschild, what would your next playbook be? I'm going to throw that out there. If you are part of the Rothschild family, you know, they own banks and stuff, and we're not going to get into the conspiracy theories. Let's just deal with the economics and the finance. What would your next move be?
Buy Bitcoin.
Good one.
I'm sorry. That would be your next move, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've already got enough dollars. I would, just from a conservative financial diversification point of view, I'd buy a crap load of Bitcoins.
Who is this beautiful feline?
This is my my friend JJ. I've got another one, but she's very ill and she's upstairs right now.
Oh dear.
Robert, you said you have a question that you wanted to ask Paul?
Yeah, Paul, I just have a question. You were mentioning about the future where, I forget the exact words that you used, but the dissemination of Bitcoin and the adoption of it obviously getting bigger and bigger and bigger. How do you see the role of big institutions who are presently buying up a lot, it seems, and yet possibly manipulating the markets with it or doing nefarious things now? How do you see that in the future, 5, 10 years down the road, 15 or however?
Yeah.
That's
Bitcoin isn't impervious to bad actors who wield undue influence. I think we mentioned a little bit earlier, I think that their ability to put their thumb on the scales will lessen as more and more retail investors buy Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. But it's not a magic wand that it's completely invulnerable to the types of influences that have held sway over fiat currency. It's better in every respect, but it's not completely separated from the types of influences we've had before. It's better, there's nothing that we humans as a committee are going to create that will be perfect. But because of the unique aspects of how Bitcoin was created, I think it's about as close as we can get to a perfect money in reality.
Okay. Let's put on our futurist hat for a moment. Potentialities of the future. How is Bitcoin going to affect the existing financial institutions? And what are some of the things they may have to adapt to as the growing user base of Bitcoin grows worldwide? What I believe El Salvador is the first country to have Bitcoin nationally produced.
I would sell all stock you have in banks right away. They're going the way of Netflix.
Good.
I don't. Awesome. Do any of us like banks? They give you 0.001% interest on your money. Mm-hmm. They have overdraft fees. They have fees for ATMs. And they provide such horrible service.
Yeah, they're the usury.
Yeah, they give you right, and they get so much money, and they actually create money. Banks are a big driver for expanding the monetary supply. And they don't do a very good job. Bitcoin was created so that I can send value to anybody in the world in a trustless way where neither of us can get cheated for free instantly without a third party. That's monumental. I don't need a bank to wire money to Tegucigalpa or to Liechtenstein anymore. I can do that myself for no cost and with settlement that happens within minutes as opposed to weeks.
Right. The banker class is definitely going to be challenged.
Yeah.
And there are very few new investment firms or systems or investment vehicles they can create where Bitcoin isn't going to challenge them in all the future endeavors.
Right. I saw a question there. I have a hard wallet, a cold wallet for my cryptocurrency. One of the sort of paradigm shifts is that with banks and brokerage accounts, you have what we call a throat to choke in case there's a problem, right? They have the responsibility, and there's FDIC insurance, et cetera. So you can feel reasonably secure until the quantum decryption boogeyman arrives that your money is safe in a bank. You can't feel safe that it won't be inflated and debased to the tune of 20% per year. So your value will be less, but the dollars themselves will be there. Part of cryptocurrency and the decentralization movement is not only the rewards of greater interest, but the responsibility of greater ownership. You are now responsible for your coins, and you can be phished, you can lose passwords, and all of this. I think we've all heard the stories of people who threw away a hard drive with hundreds of Bitcoin, et cetera. Yep. And it's becoming easier. There are more institutions sprouting up in what we call DeFi, which is decentralized finance, that mimic banks or that will take the responsibility for your custody for, a nominal fee. Everything that exists in finance now, there's already almost a better alternative in the crypto world, such that people who aren't geeks and don't want to learn about the technical aspects of blockchains can conduct their business and have better, more lucrative, more secure experiences in a way that don't unjustly benefit a few fat cats that own banks.
It's almost like the Bitcoin can be the great neutralizer to the 1% over an extended period of time because of its decentralization process. And as the big banks get into it, it's going to make them not necessarily more transparent, but more apparent to follow the rules of Bitcoin versus the fiat system, because Bitcoin will have its own securities.
Yeah, if you think back 100 years ago, the best asset you could buy would be a block of Manhattan real estate. Yep. Right. And one of the secrets about the rich is they don't sell things like that. You deed that to your children and you monetize it. You rent it out, you borrow against it. Bitcoin is already the most distributed asset in the world. Mm-hmm. Anybody with a cell phone or a computer can buy it. You couldn't buy Manhattan real estate 100 years ago. You still can't now, right? But anybody in the world almost anybody can buy the most pristine asset that there is, and no government can stop it. Mm-hmm. So, I think I just see these parallels between how we as individuals are fed up with these centralized actors that have not been acting on our behalf, have not been representing our fiducial, financial, or spiritual needs in a way that is sustainable. And it's with alternative science, whether it's UFOs or DMT or whatever you want to look at, they've not been helpful. 50 years ago, deciding that all psychedelics are evil and should be banned, that set back the world significantly. And only recently are we seeing a resurgence of the legitimacy and prestige of psychedelics in the therapeutic community.
Beautiful put. I believe DMT, ayahuasca, all of those things have a great potential future. Unfortunately, it's being radically abused by many of their practitioners right now. I have led ayahuasca journeys, and it's one of those things that I will no longer lead, but I will support others to do them because the infrastructure that's needed is vast and great. And so many people believe they can just get into ayahuasca, DMT, and yet they don't realize the damage that they cause to the potential future of a person who may not be ready for it.
Yeah, you're going to want to be ready for DMT, I can tell you.
Oh, yeah.
I may or may not have done a lot of psychedelics in my time. I may or may not have had long hair for years and years. And I can tell you that DMT is, in my view, more than thousands of times stronger than all the other ones I've ever done put together. So it needs to be approached with reverence and caution, but the potential benefits are extraordinary because, if you read a book like Alien Information Theory, Alien Information Theory, one of the sexiest book titles ever, by Andrew Gallimore, it talks about the potential that the experiences that people have while taking DMT are not necessarily hallucinogenic, unreal experiences, but are rather an opening of different sensory filters to experience a different reality. So, and then I read the book, The Spirit Molecule by Rick Strassman, which I'm sure many of us are aware of. I see you nodding your head as well. And when I read that, I was struck by the kind of similarities of the sort of patterns that emerged from the data that Dr. Strassman compiled with DMT reports and that of the early days of modern ufology. That was very interesting. Exactly. And so I became very interested in a potential link between DMT experiences and UFOs. And I think, I lived in Japan for 4 years. And one of the differences between Eastern and Western medicine is that in Western medicine, I've got a bad knee. Okay, let's x-ray your knee, give you a steroid shot, and we're going to call it Osgood slaughter and treat that. Whereas in the East, and it's not uniform, but it's more like, okay, say like with acupuncture, for example, you go in and you say, I've got pain in my knee. They will register your 12 or however many meridians that particular discipline has, and they will notice what they feel is a blockage in your energy. They're not so concerned with what you present as a symptom as what they feel is the underlying cause. So they will help your body flow its energy more naturally to cure whatever ailment that you have. They don't name specific things. So I started thinking about, the world of experiencers writ large, whether it's UFOs, DMTs, lucid dreams, ghosts, remote viewing, what have you. They may not necessarily be completely different experiences. They could be related. They could be ways that we filter this type of experience to best understand it. They could be ways that a consciousness, whether it's entities or one universal consciousness field, like the Hertext field, manifests itself at that moment. And so I started doing DMT purely in the interest of science. And the first time I did it, I felt like I was interacting with another intelligence that was mostly feminine. And I say mostly feminine because I think any spectrum that we can seek to place them on, it just falls so short. Good, bad, male, female, we just can't, or I felt I could understand the slightest thing about them. They're just so majestic and beyond my comprehension. But after I got my sea legs, I asked, are you what we perceive to be aliens and UFOs? Because my father and Jacques Vallée and many others long ago came to feel that the UFO phenomena is real and that it doesn't seem to be described in totality exclusively by extraterrestrial hypothesis, that there's more to it. And I think many of us feel that seeing a craft is not the most important part of an experience. We don't call them UFO sightings, they're experiences. So that's why I did the DMT. And I asked that question, and then I felt like millions of miles of synapses rumbling and neurons firing. And the answer came down to me that we cannot explain in a way that you would understand. And I thought, well, I understand no. So yeah, I think I'm onto something here. But I also understand that it didn't seem to me to be patronizing or a deflection of the question. It just seemed to me that there's a very real chance of a connection between these fields, and that origin is just a little bit or maybe a lot beyond my ability to comprehend in a simple conversation.
Yes. In one of my unique experiences, what I had done is was introduced to what I'll just call a celestial teacher who taught me a celestial alphabet. It's known as the 1 million letter celestial alphabet. And I learned how to translate the 1 million letter celestial alphabet down to this 26 letter encoded English. So when they're saying we couldn't explain it to you because there wasn't English at the moment that you created, nor did you have the code or the cipher to the 1 million letter celestial alphabet. And I do believe that Bitcoin may be one of those potential teachers to the 1 million letter celestial alphabet that people could go and physically experience and learn from.
Did you say 1 million letter celestial alphabet?
Yes.
I learned how to read and write Thai, which has like 20 vowels and 30 consonants. And I thought that was hard enough. So 1 million letters, whoo, I'm out.
No, that's the scale at which they think. And we have the potential to do it. It's our singular mind is in the duality. And we need to have the singular mind not in the duality, but multi-located, so we can understand the angles at which information come to us as a perspective, a perception, and how that perspective and perception generates a confident answer in the translation of something that's super high consciousness into relatable here. When I was writing my book, one of the things that came out very common is some of the high concepts that I was trying to bring out from the 1 million letter celestial alphabet is we decided that the literal metaphor is exactly what we're trying to explain when trying to explain celestial exchange, celestial wisdom, that they're operating at such a high level of perception that we need to expand our consciousness to understand the greater alphabet.
Wow, I'm still trying to wrap my head around 1 million letters. If there are 1 million letters in this alphabet, how could we possibly understand ideas built on top of that? Yeah.
Layers of conversation that are not linear. So certain letters, certain letters in the alphabet may have time, may not have time, which could include a reference from a cultural association that then creates a vision about said subject in a cultural time appropriation that is adding more and more vision to the total experience of how a 1 million letter celestial alphabet is perceived to us as a unique being in this moment of now through the final translation.
Right. I think what Stephen Wolfram and his son Christopher did in creating the language for the movie Arrival was very interesting because they approached it language from a non-linear point of view as a radically different way. You know, I have interest, as Michele knows, in, my father made a classification system for UFO sightings, close encounters of the first, second, third kind. I'm interested in creating a classification system for communications, right? Because it's one thing to say, oh, I saw a craft. Okay. But what was the communication that you believe that you had with the entity or entities? And then when you start thinking about that, well, you start brushing up against what is consciousness, but just the nature of communication. And is it synchronous? Is it happening at the same time? How, would we kind of tend to think that power has the ability to downshift into telepathy in a way that we understand? Is that the case? When you say million letter alphabet, you start to appreciate the potential complexity. And language could be, here's my not so doing well kitty cat. Yeah. The whole nature of communications with a civilization or a species that could be millions of years advanced past us. It's just mind-boggling to me. Yeah.
So let's take a second and send some positive energies to your sick cat. What is the name of your sick cat?
This is Sadie. This is my cat in black.
Your cat in black. Everybody that's listening, past, present, and future, let's take a moment to Sadie, the black cat, to send her some powerful healing energies. May it come down her crown chakra, into her skeletal system, and spread light to all the different aspects. May she have her flavor for food and tuna return to her. May the spark of chasing a mouse come back. And may all the beautiful things that are in her cat DNA help her heal and go through this situation.
Thank you. Thank you.
I have commonly said that cats are what I call unentangled observer technology. They are here to not influence us, but to be a part of the greater experience, because so many beings want to be here during the craziness of evolution.
Yeah.
So David, Michele, did you guys have anything you want to bring up?
No, you asked the question a little earlier on of how the influence of Bitcoin over a period of time. So my permutation analysis, if people sign on to this construct and understand it and support it, then you'll have a fundamental shift where people who are conceiving of power, you see, it's very hard, kind of like, to control Bitcoin based on the decentralized system that it works on. It's kind of like trying to grab a greasy cat. So like, yeah, so yeah, it's kind of like trying to grab a greasy cat. So honestly, whenever I meet any interesting topic like this, I always look at it from different points of view. So I look at it, I put myself in Rothschild's place, I put myself in the bank owner's place, I put myself in the government's place, okay? Now, what you're doing, Bitcoin, let's be real here, it's going to create rifts in a system that is already established and so on. So people will want to maintain control. So to answer Paul's point, as a Rothschild, I would definitely buy up a whole bunch of Bitcoin as a sort of, what does one say? Contingency plan, okay? But by that same token, I would absolutely try to influence systems of control in there, right? So Bitcoin, because it's fair, you can't say, well, I know a guy, okay? In terms of the macroeconomic situation, in terms of the worldwide situation, if governments allow Bitcoin to grow and so on, the entire international monetary scheme is going to change dramatically. So what has been happening in our history is that first world governments, and I call them first world because there's no such thing as first world, but everybody knows what I mean when I say first world, right? Prey on third world governments through indebtedness, as an example, which is what Andrew was...
And rates of exchange.
Correct, rates of exchange and indebtedness. So in a system like that, the dynamics change drastically, okay? To answer your point, Paul, earlier on with regard to the United States government and the complete, like, I've never seen a corporation, if you want to look at them as a corporation, that has broken every fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders, who are the taxpayers, right? So they pretty much sold them out to the banks. And if 2008 was not enough of a wake-up call for people, if 2008 was not a wake-up call, the banks gambled with your money. Everybody paid. It wasn't just me. It wasn't just you. It wasn't just a whole bunch of other people. Everybody paid. It wasn't just the people who couldn't pay the debts for the housing loans. So in a Bitcoin world, and maybe we should make a song. I'm a Barbie girl in a Bitcoin world. Never mind. In a Bitcoin world, these things are less likely to happen. Okay, they can happen, but they're least likely to happen. So honestly, Paul, this project that you're doing, I wish you luck, my brother, right? Because if there was any doubts that David is going Bitcoin, you just settle that. Thank you for coming on. Thank you. Michele, I'll let you have the last word on that.
It's really interesting hearing the objectiveness of what Bitcoin, where it's going for now, what it's beginning to solve, and where it's going to go in the future. I was thinking back on history. Every society has dealt with their own monetary system. And basically, when those monetary systems start to fail, it collapses the macro economy, which we're seeing today in our own world. So the solution-based is what Paul is trying to tell us is Bitcoin is a less corrupted, centralized money system that potentially is going to move forward. But who's to say that's going to completely solve some of these problems in the future moving on? So then we talk about consciousness type of cryptocurrency for the galactic world. We don't know what that's going to look like into the future. We can only speculate with right now what we're dealing with in our macro economies. So I look back to ancient times. I always looked at how history repeats itself. And so from a consciousness level, this is the best alternative we have today for our economy, because otherwise, if we don't find a system to solve some of the problems and the issues we're having, we're going to collapse on ourselves once again. And then we got to be able to fall back on something. If you go back to my history in Native American lore and such, they had trader beads. That was a form of trading, bartering system. This is the form of a bartering system. Now that because we're technologically more advanced than some of, I would say we were 50 years ago. We have AI, we have artificial intelligence systems, quantum computing, and now we're going forward in a new technological era, so we're trying to solve problems along the way. And there are people a lot smarter than myself, and the fiat system only worked for a time. And then you've got these, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories, but you've got the 1% to 3% controlling not only our monetary system, but the information on UFOs and where we're going to go, even with that, making contact with these interstellar galaxies out there. So, so we got to decentralize some of the information even in that. And we yet need to meet a common intergalactic community that can interact with us from a human standpoint. And its consciousness is beginning to open up where we're beginning to do that. Some of us are experiencers, some of us are not. Some of us do DMT. Whatever your experience is, that's the direction we need to go for our own consciousness and to develop, to whether we agree with it or not.
Yes. Michele, you mentioned about Bitcoin. You're right. It's not going to solve everything. I think it's a necessary but not sufficient condition for a lot of the progress we want to make. You also mentioned about beads. There's a really good book. And for anybody who's interested in Bitcoin, there's a great website called hope.com. And it's created by a guy named Michael Saylor. And it's got a lot of information, free information about Bitcoin. And I have no affiliation with that, but it's a great place to learn about it. And there's a really wonderful book called The Bitcoin Standard, which explains about monetary history. And you mentioned beads. One of the things that jump-started the African slave trade was that in West Africa, some of the economies used glass beads because they were very hard to produce. And so it was an effective currency. And then some Dutch guy realized that like his cousin in Antwerp could make those. And they came back with like ships full of these beads, and they effectively were able to buy everything. So that to me is such a morally evil example of a fiat currency system that can be expanded and exploited by anybody. Andrew, to your point about a 1 million letter celestial alphabet, Bitcoin is a 21 million unit celestial currency.
Yes. Yeah, they won't go anymore. And however, you said it's 1 million Bitcoins are not, have never been touched by the original creator.
Yep.
Okay. Great. 21 million letters celestial exchange system. in which all consciousness can tap into whatever the user interface is going to be for the time, the linear time of expression.
I mentioned my interest in creating a classification system for the communications that many of us feel we have with, call them meta-terrestrials. Another part of that, which is an even bigger Hail Mary, is to come up with a methodology and inculcate it in the broader experiencer community such that they can go into encounters that they have and bring back information that speaks to scientists. Many people who have experiences don't care what science has to say about the experiences. That's fine. But there are others, including myself, who would like to have experiences where I can bring back information that people like Seth Shostak and Michael Shermer, friends of mine, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Michio Kaku, would look at it and say, hey, now you're speaking the information, the language of science. Because right now, people come back with messages like, Earthlings, be careful, or maybe a personal message like, your Aunt Ginny has the gout. It could be very valuable for an individual, but that doesn't speak to science. And growing up in a scientific household, my father was an astronomer and astrophysicist who had a side hustle of UFOs. But at his core, he was a scientist. So I grew up in a scientific community. I didn't have the chops to be a scientist, so I became a language major. Okay. But what I'm interested in is coming up with, for those who would like to partake, an ability to go, instead of bringing back somewhat random information, go armed with a bespoke, curated, science-friendly approach to a communication and see if you can bring back a mathematically unambiguous answer. Now, I know from my experiences in DMT, I'm not really the one controlling the conversation. So there's a lot of issues involved, but to me, I think there's value if we can get the debunkers and the skeptics to lean into the phenomena. I know many of them, I know how they think, and one way to do that, besides taking them in materials to analyze, like with Gary Nolan in his lab at Stanford, is to have communications that fall along lines that they are comfortable with. And I think that can be a way to get them to get involved with the phenomena more and more, such that we don't need the United States government for anything. This is peer-to-peer, decentralized communications. And I think there's a way to get science interested. And if we can do that and get them more and more involved, that can help disclosure, or forget disclosure, because that's government related. That can promote acceptance and awareness to a much higher degree.
Mm-hmm.
Every skeptic has their Achilles heel to the truth. And we just have to discover the individual skeptic that needs their Achilles heel to be tapped and not poked with an arrow, so that they can begin to accept some of the concept, because they're going to have to accept that consciousness is a greater part of the equation. As we've seen on a lot of the UFOs, there's no moving parts on them. How do they operate?
Yeah, right. And that's one of the interesting things. As we learn about nature, things are so simple. Or, getting back to like cellular to automata, information and intelligence is so localized. Even in the photon experiments, where they realized the photons knew where the observer was expecting them to go. An individual photon has been recognized by mainstream science as having some kind of awareness, right? And now we're just learning about, forest. There's a vast mycorrhizal network of fungus underneath that's kind of like an internet router that senses, hey, that poplar needs more resources, and is working with that on a level that's just so alien to our Western science mindset. But it all comes down to simplicity and locality. And that's why I just have this natural affinity to shy away from centralized systems, because I think in large part, they can be a pernicious influence.
So one other thing to say, when it comes to dealing with people such as Michael Shermer, Neil deGrasse Tyson, we need to create a localized event in which they can perceive, receive, and process.
Yeah.
Now, that localized event will have a non-localized process behind it, unless there's a direct manifestation. And the process of direct manifestation is absolutely affected by one's disbelief. When we go to watch television, there's a very common theory called suspension of disbelief, that a person falling out of a tree, it hits the ground, will die. But they don't die, that the superheroes could do X, X, or X. So asking a skeptic or somebody in the deep science field to use suspension of disbelief has been a hard challenge. But we have to bypass that hard challenge and go right at the localized event without an expectation, which is the hardest challenge. Because, believe it or not, there's an infinite amount of channelers who have come up with quantum theory long before quantum theory came up with. All of that's been talked about, but none of it has been data oriented, in which scientists can go between all the different data points as far as we know. I'm sure in the military technologies and so on and so forth, that form of data is there, but we have to create our own databases of unique experiences in which the skeptic community can go and look at the value of the information and begin doing studies on that information.
Yeah, I organized and moderated a panel at an Alien Con conference, and I brought Seth Shostak on there because I want there to be a big tent. And I recently had a debate with Michael Shermer. And those are two that I know that if I say, look, what answer would you need from a conversation to make you sit up and take notice? They've never been approached that way. They've always had sort of evidence of different sorts thrust at them, and they're like, okay, you say you've had this experience, I can't do anything with that. So I think I think they're both intellectually honest. They've got no horse in the race. I think you can reasonably look at the evidence that we all see and come to a different conclusion. I also think we don't necessarily control what we believe. We just happen to believe something. We can control the environment that we're in and what we're presented with, but you don't really choose what to believe. But there's a way to take evidence that they understand, get them involved. And I think we then, like Christopher Mellon has done so well, force the government to do what we want, as opposed to ask them to give us what we need.
Very well put.
Very well.
So, David, did you want to add anything about the helping with the skeptics? You're muted.
Yes, I think Paul pretty much covered it. It's all about the approach. And I know people who are very scientific. I've had to deal with people like getting certain alternative practices through government. You've known my and the way you approach them has to make sense to them. You also have to take into consideration that whereas somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson he's a scientist, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes the responsibility is on the individual presenting to that individual in terms of speaking the language. But all too often we have people who are in the alternative communities or spiritual communities or consciousness communities, and they approach from their point of view. Okay. So when I was trying to get like hypnotherapy passed through the Ministry of Health of a particular country, I had to speak to them from a completely scientific point of view. Okay, a completely scientific point of view. And the other thing that I had to do, and I'm gonna don't judge me, bro. I had to speak to them from a point of view of this is how it will lower your costs. Do you see the difference? Mm-hmm. This is how it will lower your costs. When you're trying to get somebody to accept an idea, you must, and I'm a hypnotherapist, so you got to use the marketing from hypnotherapy. You must present it to them in a way that emphasizes what their needs are, right? So you would say, well, this is benefit to the world. This shouldn't be a question about needs. Well, I'm sorry to have to break it down. I said something to Michele earlier today. I'm going to say it to you guys now. Most of my knowledge about life came from Sesame Street. You remember the Tweedlebugs?
Yep.
People are Tweedlebugs. Okay? People are Tweedlebugs. And so when you are talking to people from a point of view of an idea or concept, please understand that the Tweedlebugs want to go to the beach. Okay? If you're going to sell them a door, you're going to tell them that the door opens the way to go to the beach. And that's my suggestion.
David, that I like what you said. And I've really been impressed by Temple Grandin. I don't know if everyone knows who she was, but Temple Grandin is autistic and severely so, and doesn't really think with language, but thinks with images. And she wanted to approach the cattle industry. Imagine you are, you own a cattle farm and a processing plant, right? You're not that concerned about the welfare and the cruelty that you inflict upon the cows. But Temple Grandin, who was not a, good old boy, was able to get them to adopt practices that were more humane for the cows. They're still being slaughtered, right? This is not a magical ending, but it's a relatively happy ending. And she got them to do that. They don't care about cows not having as much panic before they die. And they don't care about things like the metaphysics capture that fear and that's bad. They don't think like that. What they think about is, there's Temple. Look, cows in nature, they don't know right angles. So when you're leading up these ramps and they have to turn like that, it scares them, which slows things down. And it adds that much more terror to the cows, but impacts your profit. So she figured out a way to speak their language of profit. This will help you because it's not going to take so long for the cows there. And it helps the cows and anybody who cares about them because it reduces their suffering just a bit. So she was able to make widespread innovations that didn't, kill more cows because it's not an infinite supply of cows, but gave a little bit of comfort to these poor creatures at the worst time of their lives. And she phrased it in a way that these fat cat capitalists could understand.
Mm-hmm. Tweedlebugs.
Right. And so that's what I want to do with scientists. I want to speak their language and say, look, I know you're intellectually interested by this phenomena, but you've met with resistance and people telling you, how dare you not believe in Roswell? Okay, I'm going to come at you from a different way. I'm going to Socratically hoist you by your own intellectual petard and drag you in here and make you look at evidence in a new way.
Beautifully put. So, guys, we're at the end of the show. Paul, you want to give a way for people to contact you, website, etc.?
Yeah, I've got a pretty anemic social media footprint. I guess on Twitter, just Paul Hynek. That's about it.
Paul Hynek. Michele, you want to give a way for people to contact you?
Yes, they can contact me at activediva9@gmail.com.
Okay. And David, contact for you?
Yeah, after Active Diva 9, mine is kind of boring. I feel inadequate in some way. It's info@universalcitizentv.com. Yeah, Active Diva 9. I'm emailing you, Michele, just to use that email.
It was a joke you gave me.
All right, everybody, you know who I am. We'll be back. All right, Robert, take us away.
Each different bubble of reality is true.
A galactic historian is a person that looks at all the lines of dramatic karma.
Nudge, nudge. It's the Holy Grail.
Improvise. Mysterious. It's
counter psychic intelligence.
Why is DNA farming of this star cluster so important?
Because we do manifest our reality. We do create our reality.
Hello, let's create, let's co-create, and let's change this world with love. No matter if you're from Alpha Centauri or Earth, we all began with the same birthing process. We live in a limited point of view. Living the mystical life daily is about striving for the unlimited point of view. Each day, each human being gets an infinite amount of choices. Living the mystical life daily is about facing obstacles and challenges. The level of awareness that you are working at means you have a responsibility to be equal with it. How does one truly let go of expectation? You can make the moment that you wake up to the moment you go to sleep sacred. The keys to success: choice, 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 and choice.